The other big headline that came out of Tuesday's free agency for the Texans was trading for Joe Mixon. Now, Devin Singletary heads to New York to replace Saquon. And there are, I guess, some questions about what Mixon has left in the tank. But the Texans really had no threat of a run game last season. Charlie, have they fixed that? And are you surprised by the Mixon move considering his checkered past, although it's, a ways in the past? And I guess just because of how conservatively the Texans have traditionally operated.
Yeah, when you feel like you're close to really getting somewhere, morality can take upon a sliding scale evaluation. I mean, Mixon's heinous act, and for anyone who might not know, knocking out a woman while at Oklahoma. It's 10 years ago. Now, he's been involved in a couple of lesser incidents since. One, charges completely dropped. One, relatively minor plead out, I think. No, this does not fix the running game. Singletary ran well. Behind the Texans' porous run game offensive line, Singletary averaged more yards per carry than Mixon did with the Bengals, and an offensive line probably considered better than the Texans' offensive line, at least in the run game. But Mixon's a solid player, a three-down back, but he doesn't bring any explosiveness. I mean, his yards per carry the last 4 years, 4.0, 3.9, 4.1, 4.0. But he has been pretty durable. He's caught 60 passes 2 years ago, 52 passes this past season. I put this as positively very notable. He hasn't fumbled in 2 years. Now, if he starts laying it down, don't come back to me on this. Jinxes are BS. So he's a good, solid player. Was like fifth in the NFL in carries last season, but at 15 carries per game. So it's not like he should be completely used up. But they need a better offensive line if their run game is really to matter. They've done nothing meaningful out of the gate in free agency. ... Free agency's not done. Interior offensive line with a 23rd pick in the draft or a second-round pick, very potentially in play. Juice Scruggs was their second-round pick last year. Injury delayed start to the season. Well, hopefully with an offseason and a build-up, he's their starting center. I'm not saying he's going to give them Pro Bowl play, but hopefully competent starting play. Shaq Mason's no doubt about it back on the team because it'd be a salary cap bloodbath if you were trying to move on from him. He's all right as your right guard. Titus Howard, where he belongs, just ask Titus Howard. At right tackle, hopefully stabilizes there. George Fant's a nice journeyman. You don't want him starting 13 games. Tunsil on the left side, that leaves left guard. If you're into little miracles, I hope that Kenyon Green becomes something more than an injured bust. But no, they're not going to have a big-time run game because they add Joe Mixon, because the guy that he replaced was not materially inferior to Joe Mixon last season.
No, and I think with Kenyon Green, if there is a little bit of looking at the bright side, he struggled so bad in pass protection, where in the run game, I remember in the preseason, I saw him doing some good things in the run game. So maybe that's something he can build off of. Maybe he gives the Texans something that they're not so great at. Tunsil's kind of more of a finesse type of tackle. He's not a road grader type tackle. So maybe that works for them. We'll see how I'd like to see him add some more talent to the offensive line, but they're not going to do it at tackle. They're not going to do it where Shaq Mason is. It's going to have to address left guard. Hopefully Juice Scruggs is the answer at center. With Mixon, some of his explosiveness has fallen off. There's no doubt about it. But sometimes a good number to look at is what was his long run of the season. And then you look at some of his other seasons. His long run of last year with the Bengals was 44 yards, which is the second longest one in his entire career. So maybe there is, from time to time, he has a little bit of that explosiveness. He's a tough tackle. He's not super shifty. He's not a burner anymore, but I think he gives them enough. I think he's definitely an upgrade. And one of the biggest things, I think it was Underdog NFL, they had it on YouTube the other day, was really interesting. The Texans were the fourth highest team at under the center runs. And that's something where the Bengals just kind of stopped doing that. They were running mostly out of the shotgun because that's what Joe Burrow wanted. He didn't like doing the play action fakes where he had to turn his back to the field. So that's something the Texans do a lot. And that's something that's Mixon. That is the best thing. He is best at under the center, hand it off right at you. That's what the best thing he does in his whole game. So that's really a good fit for the Texans since they do that the fourth most in the entire league. So I think that's going to help them. Mixon kept getting stuffed on a lot of shotgun runs. We saw a fair amount of that here in Houston with our O-line was not so great either. So maybe that's something that they can learn from. So we'll see. The Texans also really bad in short yardage success, 29th in the entire league. So at least Mixon's a bigger body. Maybe he's able to get you a few first downs and punch the ball in the end zone a little more frequently, because that was something that with Dameon Pierce, Singletary, just in and around the goal line, they really struggled with that. And you don't want to have CJ Stroud doing quarterback sneaks and stuff like that to pick up first downs if you don't have to. We've seen the Chiefs, they don't even do that anymore with Patrick Mahomes after his knee got pushed out of place to the side of his leg a few years ago. So we want to keep CJ healthy. Having a goal line back that can get those tough yards for you, I think could be critical.
Mixon's a solid NFL starting back, but that's about where it ends. Well, solid has value. But let's be real. It's not like the Texans coveted Joe Mixon. They bowed out of the Saquon Barkley bidding, and then they tactically pivoted. Where running backs, unless you have a real elite back, they're basically thought of as disposable these days. Singletary basically got the same money from the Giants. I don't think Singletary was thinking, boy, I'd rather go play with Daniel Jones and the Giants than, say, with C.J. Stroud and the Texans. But Singletary got 3 years and more guaranteed money as part of a 3-year deal, whereas when the Texans didn't get Barkley and the Bengals were going to cut Mixon, you could trade, basically giving up nothing for him and have him on a 1-year, basically play for your next paycheck contract at just over $6 million. So he's a temp if he has a good season and they choose to renew vows, fine. If not, the Texans move on with 0 salary cap liability going forward.
And quickly on Mixon in the passing game, I think that's the thing everybody's kind of sleeping on here is, Singletary was fine at catching the ball. Pierce is too, but they just weren't really doing that. I'd like to see the Texans throw it to Mixon a little more. This is from Next Gen Stats, 376 receiving yards last season, plus 131 of them were yards over expected. Whereas you look at the Texans, they were plus 28 yards over expected last season, was fourth fewest in the NFL, where Mixon's number at plus 131 was the fourth best in the NFL. So when he gets out in open space, catches the ball, he's a big dude. He can break some tackles and pick up some kind of easy yards. I'd like to see CJ kind of utilize that. Those check downs, just get the ball out of your hands and let him do the work for you. And then you don't have to worry about the pass rush as much. And it keeps everybody honest if you throw to your running backs.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. So, the Mixon is really the only substantive change so far on the offense as far as targets go. Schultz gets re-signed. How much value is there in continuity for CJ's targets? And Charlie, I want you to respond to what Josh just said. How much is there potential in unlocking Mixon, giving his ability to catch the ball, and CJ being a great passer?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, Mixon averaged 56 receptions over the last 2 years, and he hasn't put it on the ground at all, so you can trust in his hands. And this isn't Texan specific. I always wonder in the NFL, you should be ripping off the best of what other teams do. Now, you need the personnel to execute it, but the Texans' screen game was, weak. Andy Reid is the screen master. So why don't you go to school on a couple of their best screens and just add them to your offense? You have a back you're comfortable throwing to, not necessarily that shifty quick back in Mixon. Fine. Motion Tank Dell to the backfield and get him the ball in a little bit of space. Continuity when the talent is good is fine. But it's like a college football team that has 10 returning starters on defense. Well, if the defense sucked, is that a good thing? Or they're all going to be more experienced? Or you just have a bunch of guys back who aren't so good? The offensive line collectively has to be better if the Texans are to have anything approaching a premium offense. They could do basically nothing against the Baltimore Ravens to begin last season and to end last season. And until you can make up some ground there, you're not truly going to be able to run with the biggest dogs and chase the biggest stakes. But they're making progress. There's a draft to come. Offensive line's considered the unit where continuity is the unit where continuity is supposed to be the greatest asset. The Texans won't have great continuity because of the injuries. Scruggs wasn't at center most of the year. Kenyon Green is in the mix. He didn't play at all. But Howard going to right tackle should give them a solid set of tackles. Mason's a legit veteran. They need better play out of center and left guard, Scruggs and whoever's at that guard spot. Otherwise, I'm not saying you're shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic elsewhere, right? C.J. Stroud bursting into superstar realm year one. Nico Collins, a massive breakout season. Tank Dell as your little home run hitter. But football cliche 101, it all begins in the trenches. And trench warfare, the Texans' offensive line in the run game was just feeble too often.
When I look at those receivers, Brandon, I look at a lot of guys that struggled to stay healthy last year. Robert Woods, Noah Brown, Tank Dell, Nico Collins missed a few games. So it's a little concerning. I like that they have a lot of bodies. It'll be interesting to see if Robert Woods is still here on the roster when the season starts, because there is some cap savings that Charlie mentioned. But there is some value in leadership. Early in the season, Robert Woods, CJ was watching him a lot, picked up a lot of first downs. In Robert Woods, he doesn't get a lot of separation, but he's a true pro. He knows how to use his body to shield defenders, and we know how accurate CJ is, so they're able to take advantage of that. Noah Brown, he looked good when he had to step up when he was healthy last year, but he missed a lot of time, especially when they needed him. And then Tank, of course, that's kind of your key. And Nico, obviously, that's where it's going to happen for you. But you need other guys. It's a long season, and nobody's super explosive, though. That's kind of outside of Tank. Nico can do some of that on the outside, but it'd be nice if they had one other guy that really had some speed to burn. So I think they addressed that in the draft. I think they have to, because if we look at these contracts, even if they keep Robert Woods, he's done after this year. Nico's about to play in the final year of his contract. Noah Brown's on a 1-year deal. John Mechie's really only got 2 years left because of that lost season. So as we look ahead, only Tank Dell is really assured to be here if we look 2-3 years down the road. So I feel like they have to address wide receiver long term. And if you're going to do that, I'd rather them do it in the draft, because this is a great year for receivers. And you know how free agency is. It's kind of a coin flip. So I'd rather roll the dice on a really fast young guy and hope he develops.
Getting Tank back should be a boon for this offense. I'm looking at this, and yes, there's obviously a question about Robert Woods here, but as it stands right now, it looks like they could go, they could put this team on the field as is and compete. Are they essentially done as far as free agency goes, or do you think maybe there's one last free agency move that Nick Caserio has up his sleeve, maybe specifically to address wide receiver?
I'd be pursuing guard. I don't know how they would view him as a fit. And Dalton Reisner made a public plea. I'm not looking for the big bag. I just want starting guard money. Second round pick of the Broncos a few years ago. Injury delayed start to last season, but then played competently by most accounts with the Vikings. Guard. I just think they're clearly one starting guard short of what you want to go to training camp with in the offensive line.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And as I look at the market for wide receivers, Marquise Hollywood-Brown is still out there. We think that Calvin Ridley is going to end up going back to the Jags. The Patriots are also showing interest, but I wouldn't want to invest in one of these guys. And I like the skill set and the explosiveness for Ridley and Brown, but Brown's bounced around from team to team, and maybe not the best character fit, and you're going to have to give him a lot of money. He's not the biggest guy in the world. So I think I want to use the draft. I'm with Charlie. If you can, I'd love to see Dalton Reisner. He's a good player, and he was one of those guys that was out there late last year. People were wondering who's going to pick him up because he's a good player. I believe he's out of K-State. And, it didn't materialize for a while, but when he did catch on, he played well. But I just wonder if he'll be a little out of their price range. And are they going to admit defeat with Kenyon Green already? They probably should, but I don't know if they will.
And then just finally, I guess, to round it out, special teams. So you mentioned Lonnie Johnson, defensive back. by trade, but he played a lot of special teams for New Orleans. He returns to the Texans. They re-signed Kaimi Fairbairn. They let Cam Johnston walk, but then acquire Tommy Townsend, all-pro punter. I mean, the special team was one of the shining beacons of the Texans team last year. Kind of, I mean, given all the success with C.J. Stroud, it kind of was maybe under the radar, but their special teams was awesome. Do you expect the same thing this year?
Yeah, they've graded out near at the top of the league the last couple of seasons. Cam Johnson was very good here, just outstanding at killing it inside the 20. Along with just the raw leg strength. But if you're going to lose him over not wanting to go to a third year, Townsend's a fabulous replacement who took a 2-year deal at $3 million per year, whereas Johnston got 3 years at $3 million per from the Steelers. So I'll basically call that a wash. Kickoff coverage in the kickoff return game so diminished with all the touchbacks. But Dameon Pierce, who frames as Mixon's complement at running back, gives you a return threat there. So I don't think there's any reason to expect their special teams to fall off.
Right. The Fairbairn thing, getting about $5 million a year. It's right. If you want a top 5 kicker, that's kind of what the market is. I would have maybe liked to see them go younger in the draft and do it that way, but I think they feel like they're close and they'd rather go with somebody that's proven that they can trust. My only issue with Fairbairn, I think we've covered it before, at least I wrote about it on Sports Map, is to me, he missed the 2 biggest kicks of the year. The extra point in the Colts game and the finale of the regular season, that was a big one. And then he missed that field goal to put the Texans up before halftime against the Ravens. So that's my only concern. Otherwise, you look at the numbers and you look at what he did the season before, he was fantastic. So I understand why they did that. And I also pointed out in my article, it's not like Fairbairn's been in a lot of important games over the past couple of years, like playoff games, stuff like that. Until last season, it's been pretty poor in Houston. So it'll be interesting to see how he performs and reacts to playing in basically a huge game every week. At least that's what we hope the Texans will be. My other thing is I don't want to see Tank Dell being your punt returner anymore. I just, after what we saw, I'd find somebody else to do that. And we talked about Dameon Pierce and Joe Mixon. They're kind of similar guys in a manner. I wonder if they could find somebody that's a special teamer that could be your third down back, maybe somebody a little more shifty that's really good at catching passes out of the backfield. Something like that would make a lot of sense to me. But overall, I like the moves on special teams. And they won some games because of special teams last year. So it is the third factor in a game, offense, defense, and special teams. And the Texans have been really good at it the last few years.
That's going to be it for this episode of Texans on Tap. Obviously, free agency is not over. And as those moves come down, make sure you're following SportsMap on all your social media platforms. Josh is going to be writing up all those moves for sportsmap.com, as he mentioned, as they happen. And then Charlie also has his weekly column on the site as well. So we want to make sure you guys are also reading that content as a supplement to what we do on video. That's going to be it. Talk to you soon. Go Texans.